The Falcons began their cut down to 53 with one surprise in Morgan Fox. Will there be any more?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you do not know me, I am your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast. We're coming up on 9 years this Thanksgiving. It's the humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that's gone strong with me, whether it's been for 9 years or 9 minutes. All you have to do to become an everydayer of this podcast, which means you make this humble podcast your first listen each and every day, is to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we'll be going through my final 53-man roster projection a few days before the Falcons and the rest of the NFL teams will be cutting down their rosters from 90 or so to 53. But the Falcons got the ball rolling. Before we get into all that, the Falcons got the ball rolling on Saturday, cutting a dozen guys. And we'll talk about that, one of whom was a surprise. We'll get into why the Falcons made Morgan Fox, the D-tackle, one of their chief free agents, a quote-unquote surprise cut, but we'll get into all that. So the dozen guys that the Falcons cut were quarterback Ben DiNucci, running back Elijah Dotson, wide receivers Jesse Matthews and Quincy Skinner, tight end Nikola Kalinic, offensive lineman Matthew Centric, defensive lineman Morgan Fox, edge rusher Ronnie Perkins, linebackers Caleb Johnson and Nick Kubitz, cornerback Lamar Jackson, and safety Josh Thompson. And they also placed center Jake Hansen on injured reserve. He suffered an injury at the tail end of that Cowboys game where he got rolled up on. And I suspect pretty much all these guys, there's maybe 1 or 2 guys that wouldn't shock me if they were put on the practice squad. But I assume the reason why the Falcons cut these guys is because they're not planning on putting any of them on the practice squad. And they'll wait till Tuesday to make the remainder of their cuts in order to try to increase the chances that several of those guys pass through waivers, because most NFL teams will make their cuts on Tuesday. And so therefore, it's a better chance that, some guys will get overlooked as teams, look elsewhere for roster pickups. And then, of course, those guys, once they clear waivers, will be able to sign back to the practice squad, the 16-man practice squad on Wednesday. But the sort of notable name of this dozen players is Morgan Fox, as I mentioned before. If you've been watching this pod over the last week, seeing Fox get cut is not a real surprise. I wondered if the Falcons would do it. But, one of the things I talked about on Saturday with the Locked On Falcons Discord, join the link in the description below if you want to join the conversation. But basically I told those folks that Fox was kind of going to be like the last man on my 53 on my projection. I was on the fence at that point in time. And then the Falcons decided on Saturday to, allow me to get off of the fence by making that move ahead of time. And the fact that he was playing late into the fourth quarter of that preseason finale against the Cowboys was not a very promising sign that he was going to stick. And Fox notably was one of the quote unquote bigger gets for the Falcons, one of the more notable free agent pickups that the Falcons had in March, that we expected him to kind of be the guy that would do the brunt of filling Grady Jarrett's absence and shoes as the team's most productive interior pass rusher. Fox being these last couple of years with the Chargers being a pretty reliable 3 to 5 sack, 30 plus pressure guy over the last 3 to 5 years, never been a stout run defender and kind of would need to be hidden as a more of a situational pass rusher. And one of the things we wondered back in March when he was signed was we talked a little bit about, the dip in production that he had as a pass rusher over the final month of the 2024 season with the Chargers, and whether that was a sign of decline. And now that we fast forward basically 5 months later, it does seem to be the answer to that is yes, it was a sign of decline. And while I don't think Fox was particularly awful in the preseason, he certainly was not a guy that looked like he was poised to have another one of those, 3 to 5 30 plus pressure sack seasons. He was looking more like a guy that might get 1, maybe 2 sacks and maybe 20 pressures if we're lucky. Which is certainly not what the Falcons were looking for. And then you couple that with the emergence of some other guys, primarily in my eyes, Brandon Dorlus, who flashed a lot of pass rushing ability in that first preseason game against the Lions. And basically, if you're going to have a one-dimensional sort of pass rush only guy, you want to bet on the up-and-coming 24-year-old in Brandon Dorlus as opposed to the declining 31-year-old or soon-to-be 31-year-old in Morgan Fox. Not to mention, it does feel like the Falcons are planning on using more of that 3-4 base defense. They've been playing almost exclusively the 3-4 bear look in their base defense in the preseason. And certainly when training camp began and preseason began, I expressed my skepticism. I don't think this is something that the Falcons are going to carry over into the regular season. But it does feel like that may be the case, right? We thought at the time, and I'm saying we, myself and my ego, they were doing this mostly because they didn't have enough bodies at linebacker or that they wanted to be vanilla. But the more I'm hearing, the more it does feel like this is going to be the bridge between the Jeff Ulbrich and Raheem scheme, where they're going to play 3-4 in base defense. That's the Raheem part. And then they're going to be 4-3 over in their nickel fronts. That's the Ulbrich part. And so, that means if you're going to play that into your base defense, you want a guy that can add a little bit more value to the nose spot. And that was not going to be Morgan Fox. Now, they don't have a true nose on the roster, right? But they've been rotating Kentavious Street, LaCale London, and Taquan Graham in that spot over the course of the preseason. And those were all guys that I thought were on the bubble. I did not have those guys making the roster on my initial July 53-man breakdown, but it does not appear that those guys are on the bubble anymore, with Street consistently working ahead of Fox in the rotation, and Graham as well before he suffered his calf injury that caused him to miss the last 2 preseason games. But, that to me basically explains the Morgan Fox release. The Falcons are going to have to eat about $2.25 million in dead money this year and then another $750,000 in 2026 in dead money due to the $3 million guaranteed that he got on a 2-year deal that he signed with the Falcons back in March. So it's not a great look for the Falcons free agency. We were highly critical of the Falcons free agent moves back then, and I don't know if Morgan Fox is going to be the last guy that the Falcons signed in March in free agency that is potentially going to get cut. There's a couple of guys on the bubble, including some of these D tackles that we just mentioned, some of the DBs like Mike Ford and Keith Taylor, a couple of backup offensive linemen that the Falcons prioritized re-signing back in March. So, let's get into, who's on the bubble, who's going to make it, at least according to yours truly. And we'll start with the offense as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So we pump a lot on this podcast. If you know, and Viagra and Cialis can help us do that. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow in the other part of your body that you often think with. And unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue, kicks in fast, and on average in just 15 minutes. And the effects can last up to 36 hours. So you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. So get your pump on by heading to rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL and you'll get 15% off your order. That's rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing review. Please review the Rugiet website for full safety information. And guys, I want to tell you about an upcoming holiday which occurs on August 26th. It is officially a brand new holiday. It is FanDuel Futures Day, the perfect holiday for the football fans that live for the bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is going to give you deals on upcoming NFL season predictions. And whether you want to call your shot on who you think is going to win the MVP, or you're eyeing that long shot division winner, or you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. It is the day to celebrate and win some cash. So head to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today, and you can get started started planning your futures bets right now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only at FanDuel. Play your game. So before we get into my 53-man offensive roster projection, I want to let you guys know on an important request we have here at Locked On. We want to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer some questions on our advertising. So go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. And you can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks for helping us out. So let's get into this roster projection. And this is more of a projection of what I think the roster is going to look like come week one than necessarily what the roster is going to look like on Wednesday and Thursday when the Falcons make their initial moves. I think there are going to be obviously more moves to come in the lead up to week one. So this is more a projection of, what this roster is going to look like Monday, September, or whatever, when we get there. So I want to keep that in mind. So a couple of these guys that I'm projecting to get cut, may not get cut this week, but might get cut at a later date. So we'll see on that front. Now, there is one specific position that we'll talk about, the offensive tackle position, where I do expect the Falcons are definitely going to add some help, or if they don't, then we will spend some time, as we like to do, complaining about that here on the upcoming podcast. So we'll have to sort of wait and see on that front. But other than that one position, we can speculate endlessly about other positions where they might, and I might mention that as we break this thing down. We'll go through each position group, but I have 24 guys making it on offense: 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 7 receivers, 4 tight ends, and 9 offensive linemen, 9 offensive guys on the practice squad, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 2 offensive linemen. So let's get that. Let's look at the quarterback position. Michael Penix and Kirk Cousins, of course, making it. The question is whether Easton Stick as the QB3 is going to be carried on the roster. I don't think that will be the case at least week one. I think they'll cut him. They'll bring him back on the practice squad. And if they need to promote him as a QB3 at a later date, on the event of an injury or a possible trade to Kirk Cousins, which, again, we will continue to stress is only probably a 1% chance of that happening. But if that's the case, then we'll see. But, I think given injuries elsewhere on the Falcons roster where they kind of need to shore up some spots, I think keeping Stick on the roster week one is kind of a little bit of a luxury. And that's coupled with some thoughts I have where he was kind of, other than Carson Wentz, who signed today, I believe, with the Vikings, was kind of the last veteran quarterback to be signed this offseason. He had an up and down preseason. So I don't think there's really a threat that another team's going to come in and be like, oh, we got to get Easton Stick in our building. So I don't think you have to be worried about that. And like, oh no, if we cut Easton Stick, he's going to be gone. To me, at this stage in Easton Stick's career, Atlanta is really the last shot he has to sticking in the NFL. So I don't see any incentive for him to be like, well, I'm going to go to greener pastures or anything like that. This is his last shot. So not to mention he's a vested veteran. So, he won't have to clear waivers or go through waivers in order to return to the Falcons if he's cut. So basically, if he gets cut, then he gets to choose what his next destination. And basically, I'm arguing I don't see any reason why he wouldn't choose to come back to Atlanta as a practice squad player. But looking at the running back, I only have 2 running backs on the roster. That's Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. I don't see Carlos Washington making it. He missed all of training camp pretty much. He might be an IR candidate at that point, but I can't see them keeping him on the roster. I do think they'll carry 2 running backs on the practice squad, Jashawn Corbin and Nate Carter. I would guess Corbin, who was my RB3 projection back in July, would be the front runner to be the RB3 if they are going to keep 3 running backs, just because the special teams ability and the pass protecting ability, I think, was a little bit ahead of Carter. And I could imagine a scenario where, they promote him off the practice squad heading into week one, just so they can carry 3 on their 53 or at that point 55-man roster going into week one. But I could also see a world where they scour the waiver wire for a new RB3 that can come in and potentially play some special teams at wide receiver. I have them keeping 7 for the time being because of Mooney's unknown status for week one. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Raymond McLeod, Kadero Hodge and Jamal Agnew. We all knew that those guys were the 5 locks entering camp. Casey Washington won the wide receiver 6 spot outright. And I think David Sills is going to be kept as that 7th guy until Mooney is ready. If Mooney is ready to play week 1, they'll cut Sills and put him on the practice squad. If not, then Sills is going to be carried as that 7th wide receiver until Mooney is healthy. And then I have 3 guys on the practice squad, and Nick Nash, Chris Blair, and Dylan Drummond. All 3 of those guys played reasonably well in the preseason. I wouldn't put Dylan Drummond in the same boat as Nash and Blair personally, but he was productive. And it's possible if the Falcons do waive those guys, 1 or more of them could be claimed. But that's why you plan on bringing all 3 back. And so even if you lose 1, you still have 2. So we'll see on that front. 4 tight ends, which is, I guess, probably the biggest surprise of this group. The 3 that we've been discussing all summer long as virtual locks, and Kyle Pitts, Charlie Warner, and Ticum Cotoriano. But I do have Felipe Franks making it as the 4th, just solely because of his special teams value. I'm just as surprised as many of you, but the more and more I look at it, I feel like the writing is on the wall that the Falcons really value Felipe Franks in that special teams role. I have Josh Simon on the practice squad. Simon was one of several quote-unquote 8th rounders that got a lot of hype as the high-profile undrafted free agents. I thought he struggled in the preseason games, but he's a stash guy, and you hope that next summer he can, make a leap and then be worth a roster spot. On the offensive line, this is where all the moving parts are going to be. I have 9. That does not include Caleb McGarry and Storm Norton. I'm assuming both of those guys are going to go to the injured reserve, as we discussed on Friday after the game. I'm assuming until we hear otherwise that Caleb McGarry is going to be out for the year. But hopefully we get some good news on that front later at some point in the future. And, we can sit there and say, okay, Caleb's going to come back at this point and save our offensive line. And then with Norton, he's going to be a guy that I expect to miss the first month of the season due to the ankle surgery he had last week. And so he could go on the injured reserve as a designated return, which means you're going to miss at least the first 4 games of the season and then potentially be eligible to come back. So the 9 I have are Jake Matthews, Matthew Bergeron, Ryan Nuzzo, Chris Lindstrom, and Elijah Wilkinson as the 5 starters heading into week 1. The 4 backups being Jack Nelson, Javon Gwynn, Kyle Hinton, and a tackle to be named later. It wouldn't shock me if Brandon Parker survives the initial cuts to kind of stand in for that guy until the Falcons find that guy. But I don't think Parker is going to be a guy that's going to survive until week 1. And so that's why I did not include him. I have 2 offensive linemen on the practice squad in Joshua Gray and Jordan Williams. I wouldn't be shocked if Gray is the guy that stands in as the 9th offensive lineman on the roster until the Falcons get through that initial wave of cuts and bring in somebody else. And that would allow the Falcons to potentially do a better job sneaking him through waivers, because he's one of those guys that they could wind up waiving and some team could scoop him up on Wednesday if they wanted to. And so if they can hold on to him for an extra day and then potentially bring in a veteran or make a trade or something like that, we could see that also happening. So we'll see what the Falcons do on the offensive line. I have no idea who that tackle to be named later is going to be. I'll just throw out a couple of names, as some dart throws. And if one of them hits, we'll be like, oh, yeah, I'm a genius. I saw it coming the whole way, and we'll just ignore the other names that I also threw out there. So Carter Warren of the Jets, Stone Forsythe of the Giants, Kendall Lamb of the Eagles, Ryan Hayes of the Dolphins, Kadeem Telfort of the Packers, Bobby Hart of the Commanders. I didn't even realize Bobby Hart was still in the league. Trent Brown of the Texans would probably be the ideal option for a trade, but unfortunately Trent Brown, I believe, is still on the Texans pup list and isn't healthy. And so that's probably an indicator that he won't be ready for week 1. But, in theory, if the Falcons get good news, call up the Texans like, hey, what's the situation with Trent Brown? You're like, oh yeah, he's going to be ready by like week 3. And the Falcons going to be like, okay, well, we're going to roll with Elijah Wilkinson for the first couple of games. And we might, again, not saying that's a likely scenario, but I'm just imagining a situation. I could also imagine a scenario where the Falcons just go with familiar faces, guys that have been in this building in the past and that they know that potentially can plug and play, that have flashed ability in the past, that now have gotten a few more years of development. Barry Wesley, Josh Miles, Leroy Watson are some of those names. So we'll see what the Falcons do at the offensive tackle position. I think they're going to try and add a plug and play guy at that right tackle, someone who has experience starting games in the NFL at right tackle. I see a lot of names getting thrown around. A lot of these guys tend to be left tackles. And again, the thing I want to remind folks is not moving from left to right is not a fluid and easy transition that everybody can make. Some guys can make it, but a lot of guys can't. And so it's not as simple as a lot of people think, which gets into the discourse surrounding, moving Jake Matthews and Matthew Bergeron that I saw a lot of people discussing last week on the internet and whatnot. And again, we're not going to get into that, but if you want to go check out Thursday's Falcon Squad show, we kind of dismissed that as a plausible idea for the Falcons moving forward. So I think offensively, the biggest curveball is keeping Felipe Franks instead of a third running back, I think. But let's switch to the defense and talk about some other potential curveballs with, some moving parts on the D-line and the cornerback room as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So this episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner, which means fantasy football season is back, and you can feel the buzz in the air. Everybody's researching, drafting, and building their championship squads. And if you haven't started or a league or joined one yet, it's the time to do so. And why not do it on Yahoo Fantasy? I am doing it on Yahoo Fantasy right now. And you should too, whether you're a first timer or a veteran making their millionth league. And with the season kickoff on September 4th, now is the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football, which means you're going to have so many different fun ways to win. If you want more ways to play, try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. And if you want to play instantly with friends, try the new Draft with Friends mode. Prefer the Classics. Get your crew together and go head-to-head in a private league. Or if you don't have a crew, no problem. Join a public league. It's the easiest way to play. So the NFL season kicks off on September 4th. So don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. So I have the Falcons keeping 26 guys on defense, 3 on special teams, 11 D linemen, 5 linebackers, 10 DBs, 7 defenders on the practice squad, 3 D linemen, 1 linebacker, and 3 DBs, and 1 specialist on the practice squad. Let's get into that D line. I've seen a lot of people projecting, 13 guys that the Falcons are going to keep between the interior guys and the edge rushers. Falcons could absolutely do that because the Falcons going to Falcon. But for me, my personal opinions, it doesn't really make sense to do that. I mentioned before how you kind of get diminishing returns on the more D linemen that you keep. You're not necessarily keeping guys that much fresher. You might save them a few snaps a game. But if we're already going to be constantly rotating guys every 4 plays, they already should be pretty fresh. You saw this manifest itself on Friday night against the Cowboys, right? Where the Falcons had 10 D linemen play in that game. They averaged about 26.7 snaps per game, ranging from 17 low of Zach Harrison and a high of 38 to Khalid Kareem. And if that was a normal regular season game, Harrison would have probably easily played 25 snaps, and Kareem probably would have played, closer to 30 snaps or something like that. And so, when you're playing in a 4-man front in nickel, probably 70 to 80% of the time, you don't need that many D tackles. And even if you do play that 3-4 base that we were talking about, I think you can get away with 5 interior D linemen for the 15 to 20 plays that you're going to be playing base on average. There are going to be some opponents against, Miami, San Francisco, Buffalo, Arizona, Minnesota, etc., that might force you to play a lot more base. But those are the weeks where you can add an interior D lineman to the mix from your practice squad and make it work. So the 11 guys I have keeping, all that to say, at edge rusher, I have Leonard Floyd, Arnold Pichetti, James Pierce, Jalen Walker, and Braylon Trice. The 6 interior D linemen I have are Zach Harrison, although on this graphic he is listed as an edge rusher, David Onyemata, Ruka Roro, Brandon Doris, Kentavious Street, and Taquan Graham, with Simeon Barrow and Laquale London on the practice squad, and Khalid Kareem as well as the practice squad edge rusher. To me, the X factor in this is going to be Taquan Graham. I have him on the roster because I'm assuming that his calf injury that has caused him to miss the last 2 weeks of practice is not going to linger that much longer, that I'm assuming he'll be ready to go by week 1, week 2, which is probably not going to justify the Falcons putting him on an IR, but that is a possibility if this injury is going to linger longer than that. And that will potentially open up a roster spot somewhere else on the roster, potentially on offense, potentially on defense. But for the time being, I'm going to assume that he's going to be ready earlier than like week 4. And so therefore he will have a roster spot, even if he's probably maybe not on track to play week 1. So we'll see on that front. At the linebacker position, I have 5 guys: Caden Ellis, Divine Diablo, JD Bertrand, D'Angelo Malone, and Josh Woods. And of course, Malone also gives you an extra body as an edge rusher, which is again another reason why I don't think you need to have that too many more bodies up front. I did not have Josh Woods making it before my initial training camp projection back in July. And essentially, he's taking Troy Anderson's roster spot, right? Troy Anderson's injury opened up that opportunity. Troy's going to almost certainly start the year on the reserve PUP list, that physically unable to perform list, which basically functions like the injured reserve at that point, where he'll miss a minimum of the first 4 games of the season. Maybe he comes back this year. Maybe he doesn't. Similar to McGarry, I'm going to just assume Troy Anderson's going to be out for the year until we hear otherwise. At cornerback, this to me was the hardest position to project, right? Because I feel like there are 4 guys that are locks: AJ Terrell, Mike Hughes, Natron Brooks, and Billy Bowman. And then it's kind of a toss-up for the last 2 spots. I picked CJ Henderson and Mike Ford. I was on the fence really with D. Alford, and CJ Henderson. Went back and forth. I'm also assuming Clark Phillips is going to start the year on the injured reserve with that rib injury, but maybe again, similar to Taquan Graham, he's going to be ready to go sooner than that. And so that will change the math on that. I do have 2 practice squad players in Kobe Bryant and Dante Manning. Basically, I chose Ford because of the special teams value. He has some inside-outside versatility. I am not a big fan of Mike Ford. If you've been listening to this podcast for the last 5 months, you know that. I don't typically root for players to get cut, but I'm not going to lie, like there's going to be a little bit of a smile on my face if the Falcons do, quote unquote, do the right thing and cut Mike Ford, because he is infinitely replaceable and upgradable for this Falcons defense. But ultimately, Falcons gonna Falcon. But I have the Falcons choosing Henderson over Alford just because between Bowman, Brooks, and Mike Ford, they have plenty of guys that can play inside. You need another guy other than Mike Ford to play outside. And I don't think Kobe Bryant did enough to justify a roster spot. Instead, as a practice squad spot. And so that's why I chose CJ Henderson. But you could imagine a scenario where, it's D. Alford and CJ Henderson as the last 2 spots, as opposed to Ford and Henderson or some other combination, because Falcons going to Falcon. So we'll see on that front. Safety is a pretty easy group to project. The Jesse Bates, Xavier Watts, DeMarco Hellams, and Jordan Fuller. I would have probably picked until yesterday Josh Thompson over Henry Black on the practice squad, but since Thompson already got cut, hey, you made it easy for me. I got Henry Black making the practice squad as a safety. And then on special teams, we have Younghoe Koo, Bradley Pinion, and Liam McCullough, with Lenny Krieg making it as a practice squatter. And because he's an international player, he's going to count as the 17th member of the practice squad player. As I sat here today, I realized a conspiracy theory. And, I don't know if anybody else came up with this, but I started to think, like, why did the Falcons have Koo kick on Friday? If you listen to the Falcon Squad show, to me, it was like, it didn't make a lot of sense, because like the Falcons opened Pandora's box, because, with Koo kicking, he missed a kick. And now all of a sudden everybody's going to be like, oh, Koo is the worst. Let's move on. But I started to think, and I'm like, oh, well, maybe the Falcons just wanted to stash Lenny Krieg. They already knew Koo was going to be their guy. And so they knew if Krieg went out there and kicked really well in Dallas, that it would be more likely that another team would try to swoop in and claim him. Because basically, as the international player, once he clears waivers and the Falcons put him on the practice squad, no team can come and poach him. But the time potentially there is an opportunity for a team to poach him if he is waived on Tuesday and then put in a waiver claim, they could potentially poach him. So maybe the Falcons are being real sneaky, right? And by thinking, let's not let Lenny Krieg advertise himself, and maybe, he'll be out of sight, out of mind for our teams that may be looking for a new kicker. So that's my conspiracy theory. Let me know if you've heard anybody else say that, but we'll run with that at this point in time. So those are the 53 guys I have the Falcons making the roster. If I wind up batting 1,000 on this thing, I'm going to gloat about it at some point in the future. And if I don't, then I'll make all the excuses, right? Our goal is always to get above 90%. So that basically means 48 out of 53 selections. And then, a 75% hit rate on the practice squad, which means 12 out of 16 plus Lenny Krieg being that 17th guy. So if that happens, right, if I do hit that 90+% on the roster and 75% plus on the practice squad, you guys are obligated to have to subscribe to the Locked On Falcons podcast. If you watched and listened today, that meant that you signed the contract. You got to read the fine print. So you have to subscribe. Them's the rules. And so that's going to do it for us here. We have 2 shows coming your way tomorrow. We're going to finish up that conversation with Matt Waldman about the incomparable Michael Penix. That should be in your feeds on both YouTube and audio feeds sometime in the afternoon on Monday. And then on Monday evening on YouTube, we'll be joined by Joe Patrick of 92.9 The Game. And then, of course, that will be in your audio feeds on Tuesday morning as well. Joe will be playing the hits, right? Talking roster, talking training camp, talking season expectations, how they deal with the McGarry injury. So we'll be playing the hits on that. So that is in store for you here on Locked On Falcons, which you inevitably have to subscribe to once, my roster projections immaculately come true. And then, of course, go check out the survey at lockedonpodcast.com/survey. And again, you get a chance to enter for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards if you complete that survey. And for your second listen, make sure you check out Locked On Fantasy Football so that you can, hopefully get some tips to help you win your league. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.